Hello everybody, welcome to this follow-on video from my reflected cross-site scripting tutorial. I'm going to show you a method of using reflected cross-site scripting to perform an attack where you can steal a user's session token. If you haven't seen the original video, you can check somewhere on the screen. There'll be a link and also in the description. And there'll also be a link to all the code I'm using in this video at my GitHub, which will also be in the description. So our aim for this attack is to steal the user's session token, which is a key that's used to identify an authenticated user in an application. If you know their session token, that means you can log in as them and masquerade as them. You can perform actions on their behalf as if they were logged into that application themselves. The session token is stored in the page's cookie. So we can open up the console and type document.cookie to see that value. This is the value we're looking for. PHP session ID, and it's this string that's going to let us impersonate the user. So we can grab that string by splitting the document.cookie. We document.cookie.split, and we're going to split on the string PHP sesh ID equals. That's going to split that string into two halves, one being the text before PHP session ID equals, and the other value being the piece of text that we want, which is the session token. So we're going to take that second value like so, and we get the text that we want. So we can insert all that code into an XSS payload by opening up a script tag, inserting that code that we just wrote into an alert function, and closing the script tag. And there we go. We now know where to find the session token, but that doesn't help us with our attack quite yet. We can't just rely on the user to paste in some JavaScript into the form field to execute our attack. What we want is a URL that will execute the attack when it's clicked. We can look at the URL of the page when a value is typed into the form field. This value is passed as a get parameter. We can see that in the URL, the name parameter is equal to the value that we passed in. We can construct our own URL where the name parameter is actually our JavaScript payload. We can construct our URL like this, using the first half of that URL and then entering our JavaScript XSS payload as part of that parameter. So now, when we visit this URL, we have the JavaScript payload executed, and we didn't need to touch that form field at all. Printing that session token to the screen is a good first step, but what we really want is to be able to record and capture that session token so we can use it at a later date. So what we can do is write our own small script that can run on a web server that will allow us to read any session tokens that are passed to it as a get parameter. This simple PHP code reads the get parameter, writes it to a file, and then just closes and ends. So I'm going to spin up a simple server using PHP's built-in server command. We'll just show you what that command is very quickly here. One line, just PHP, TAC capital S, and then the IP address and port you want to use. I'm just using this for demonstration purposes, but this could easily be a real server on the internet. So we're going to start running that. We're now running on the local host, and can also show you the session file that is currently empty. And this is what's going to be used to hold our session tokens. So if we visit this website and visit the name of that script, which was the sessionstealer.php. So we go to 127.0.0.1/sessionstealer.php. And we give the session parameter a value of 12345. We can see that that page has been accessed, and now if we show the session file, we've got the value 12345. So now this page is ready to extract session tokens. All we need to do is replace that value 12345 with the actual session token of the user on the page. Now the next question is, how do we get the user to visit this page? We can use a JavaScript function, window.location.replace, which redirects the browser to whatever page you tell it to visit. So just as an example, we're going to go to Google. There. So instead of Google, we're going to give it the value of our website, and we're going to use that as part of the XSS payload that we're using as part of our attack. So let's start to craft this payload now. I'm going to start with our script tag, and then we want to do window.location.replace, and the URL to our web server is HTTP, and we need to escape this / because the / in JavaScript is considered a comment character, and we don't want to use a comment, so we just want to have the actual string of the / twice. Then the IP address, which is just the local host, and we can put the port in for good measure, but it's probably not necessary. And the name of the script, which is sessionstealer.php. The session parameter equals, and then we want to concatenate that with the value we got from the document.cookie. So if you remember, we split the document.cookie to get that PHP session ID, and so we're going to paste that back in here. So we have the session parameter concatenated with that string, and then we're going to end it again with another script tag. So if we paste this into the form field of our application and submit, and we go back to our terminals, we see that there was another access to the web server here. And if we again list the values in the session file, we can see a second line has been added with the value of our session token. So the attack does work. Now the next task is to have that as part of the URL rather than needing to paste that into the form field. I've emptied the session file again just to make it a bit easier to see when the attack has worked. So we'll go back and look at our payload. Now we can just add this on to the end of the URL where the name parameter is, but you'll see in a moment why that doesn't work. So I'll paste that in and I hit enter, and we're not taken to our PHP script. And if we open up burp, we can see why that is. So we're going to turn up the intercept and we're going to refresh this page. So you can see here the payload that we sent. Here it is. And you'll see that a lot of the characters were URL encoded. So for example, this quote was turned into %22. This angle bracket was turned into a %3c. But the plus character has remained a plus character. It's not become URL encoded. And that's because in an HTTP request, a plus character represents a space character. So what's happened is that the concatenation of the strings that we were trying to perform has not occurred. Instead, that plus character has remained a space. We can view the source of the page to see how that's happened. If we find the spot where our payload was echoed to the page, we see here we've got the first half of the payload, and then there's a space, and then the second half. So there wasn't actually a concatenation occurring. There wasn't the execution of that JavaScript code. So instead, what we want to do is we want to URL encode that plus character before we send it. So we can see the value for the plus character if we go to the decoder in burp and we type plus, and we can encode as URL. So it's %2b. So we'll come back to our payload and replace this character with a %2b. And we're going to try and use this and see if this works instead. So I'm going to paste this in place of our other payload, and we're going to hit enter, and now we can see we have gone to the session stealer script, and if I concatenate the session file, we've got the session token right there, so that's worked perfectly. Now we have the URL we're going to use to execute our attack, but we still need to trick the user into clicking on that URL. So what we can do, and what I have done, is to create a fake version of the DVWA homepage. Just copy pasted all the HTML, and I've hosted it on our web server, which you can see here. You can see that it's identical to the original. what we're going to do is to replace one of these links on the left hand side to have it redirect to our web server instead of one of the challenges. So we're going to find the XSS reflected link over here, and I'm going to separate that out to make it a little bit easier to see. So we see here the href is pointing to where the challenge will be kept. We're going to get rid of that. And we're going to get rid of this onClick attribute as well. So now what we're going to do is add some JavaScript code. I'm going to open up my script tag. And I'm going to paste in a variable for sake of time here. So variable XSS URL is equal to that string, that URL that we just constructed a moment ago. Now the next thing I'm going to do is add the ID attribute to this link, and you'll see why in a second. We're going to add a second line of JavaScript which assigns the element which has the ID link, the href, equal to the string of this variable right here. So essentially what that means is we're making this link lead to this URL, which is our server. So if I save this and I refresh this web page, you can spot in the bottom of the browser I've moused over the link, and you can see that that leads to our web server as opposed to the other ones which lead just to the challenges. You might notice I've used these URL encoded %3c and %3e in place of the angle brackets, and that's because we don't want the script tags to be rendered as part of the HTML on the page, but we want them to be part of the link instead. So I'll show you what happens if we were to use actual angle brackets rather than the URL encoded versions. So I'll just comment out the first variable and I'll replace these with angle brackets, and there's one more up here. So now if I save this and reload the page, you can see that the element hasn't been loaded properly, and we can inspect that element to show you where that's happened. The script tags have actually been rendered as part of the HTML of the page, and everything that was after this angle bracket that was over here has just been rendered as a string that gets echoed to the screen. So we want to keep those URL encoded angle brackets in order to make sure our script works properly. Now let's reload the page with the correct script saved onto our web server. So we'll refresh this, and let's click on our link and see where it takes us. So we get sent to our session stealer PHP code, and if we cat our session file again, we see now we've taken the session token. So our attack is almost ready, but there's one more thing we need to add. Right now we see when the user clicks that link, they're sent to our server fine and we're successfully taking their token, but it's quite obvious that something has gone wrong. What would be better is if our script could redirect them to the place they were trying to reach, so that they don't even realize that we've performed an attack. So what we're going to do is go back to our session stealer script, and we're going to add in a short bit of JavaScript that will redirect the user back to the cross-site scripting reflected page. Now we save this and we go to our fake DVW homepage again. So now when I click on that link, we get taken very quickly to our server. Our session token is stolen, and then we're redirected to the correct page. And if you blinked, you would have missed that. So hopefully the user would too. And just to confirm, we can again concatenate the session file, and we have that session token third one stored there. So that is it. Our attack is ready. We've got a fake DVWA homepage with an edited link that sends you to a web server that will steal your session token and redirect you back to the original page, hopefully leaving the victim none the wiser. There are many different ways that you could use cross-site scripting to perform an attack. This is just an example of one of them, but hopefully it gave you an insight into how you might use this kind of vulnerability to perform a real practical attack that you might see in the real world. I hope you really enjoyed watching this. I had a lot of fun making it, And if you've got any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. And don't forget, you can find all the code that I've used in this session on my GitHub, which should also be linked in the description. Thank you very much for watching.